Greetings from Austin, Texas. I'm Victoria DiFrancesco Soto. I'm the Assistant Dean of Civic Engagement here at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin. And it is my pleasure to be with you here today to celebrate Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, as we saw in this video. And I promise we will loop back to this video toward the end of our talk. You'll probably notice that our guest for today seems very familiar. She was featured in this video because Shamina Singh was one of the co-chairs of the advisory board of the Asian American Foundation that is really the foremost organization in this country working toward combating hate and working for a more inclusive community for our Asian American and Pacific Islanders. But first, I want to give a brief and official welcome to our guest, Shamina Singh. We're very proud at the LBJ School. She is one of our alumni and an all-around rock star. She is the founder and president of the Center for Inclusive Growth, the philanthropic hub of MasterCard. And Shamina is really one of the pillars, not just nationally, but globally in the philanthropic space. She also serves as the Executive Vice President of Corporate Sustainability. In both of these capacities, Shamina is charged with activating the philanthropic dollars of the MasterCard Impact Fund, a $500 million pool of capital committed to advancing inclusive growth around the world. So with that, welcome to Texas, Shamina.
Great to be here, even if virtually.
Well, Shamina, there's a lot to unpack here. I want to talk about the fantastic work that you're doing both at MasterCard and with the Asian American Foundation. But first, I want those of us here today to learn a little bit more about who you are and what your path to the LBJ School and to your path to public policy and public affairs was. So you are a native Virginian, so you are Southerner/East Coaster. What brought you to Texas and ultimately to the LBJ School?
Well, thanks again for having me. I wouldn't miss a chance to connect with the LBJ students and hope that this conversation is something that they can latch onto and, consider me a friend and a resource, because I've been there and I've been through the experience. And so I was trying to think about what the timeline is right now. So right now it is May. So you should be writing your thesis or getting ready for graduation or getting ready for your summer in between. So we can definitely talk about that too. But the reason that I came to the LBJ School was I wanted to work for Ann Richards, who was running for governor on her campaign. But and that was one part. The second part was I wanted to learn from Barbara Jordan, who was teaching at the LBJ School at the time. And LBJ is my favorite president. So there were a number of reasons that I came to Texas, but those are probably the most important.
So you just named the three biggest Texas heroes of contemporary time. LBJ, we've got Barbara Jordan, and Ann Richards. That is the most beautiful trifecta there. Shamina. Not that I'm biased, right? But so you come to the LBJ School. You're here at the time when Barbara Jordan was still teaching. You hear these stories about Barbara Jordan and the halls would just part. And I mean, tell us about that experience of engaging with Barbara Jordan, her ethics classes, and just what it was like in terms of the coursework and the skills that you developed here at the LBJ School that has propelled you globally.
Yeah, so thanks. So it's very interesting. I showed up in Texas in 1993, I think, or 1992, and then started working on the governor's campaign in 93. So by the time the campaign finished, and I applied to the LBJ School, which is a really funny story about Ann Richards' daughter, Ellen Richards, who was my roommate in Texas. Barbara Jordan she wouldn't let, if there was space available, she wouldn't let first years into her class. So I actually didn't get to sit in her class, but I did get to interact with her. And when she passed and her coffin was laid in state at the Texas Capitol, the first year stood sort of as I don't know, as witnesses or whatever in front of her coffin. So I engaged with her a little bit, not necessarily as a professor, although I did learn from her. But the truth is that the first years, the closest we got to her was really standing at attention at her funeral service. So, all of those things together combine to make, at least for me, Texas and the LBJ school and the LBJ experience is a really important cornerstone for, I guess, how I look at the world and to your point, how it's sort of propelled everything I've done since, but a really important time.
And Barbara Jordan is a force larger than life still. She, as you know, we have the annual Barbara Jordan National Forum. So I think that's a really important time for us who didn't know Barbara Jordan to come commemorate her and also learn about what she has done as one of the most trailblazing women of color in our nation's history. And, and staying on your experience at the LBJ school before we move on to life post LBJ. But Shamina, I hear that you had a very interesting experience that summer between your first and second year, not the most traditional summer experience. So I wanted you to share that with us, if you could.
So as I said before, I came to study at the LBJ school because I had come off the Ann Richards campaign. So the political work was sort of and social justice work was the incentive and what was driving me. And so when I came to the LBJ school, I kept my job. So after the Ann Richards campaign ended, I started working for SEIU, which at the time, Governor Richards' older daughter, Cecile, was involved with, as was Cecile's husband, Kirk Adams. And so I have this running joke that I think that I've worked for almost every member of the Richards family at some point in my life. But when I started working for SEIU, I was doing research on corporations who the labor union was examining their business practices and in terms of how they were treating their workers. And so when I came to school, I kept my job because everything I was learning at the school was actually helping me do my job better. And so I had a really great linkage between the work that I was doing almost every day and then what I was learning. So that contextual learning was really important for me. And the other thing was that I didn't have to stress about getting a job between the summer between my first and second year because I was already working. And so while I appreciated the fun times and everything folks were doing between first and second year, I actually was traveling to Pennsylvania, and then I was in Michigan actually, where I was protesting and, had the handcuffs put on and sort of, I don't know if I was officially booked as arrested, but it felt like I was arrested during one of the protests. And so it's sort of like when we all come back together and we say, oh, what'd you do between your, whatever, your time? I said, well, as a matter of fact, and talked a lot about the protests and a lot about the work that I had done with nursing home workers. And I think, again, that was sort of a pretty unique experience, but something that was really formative.
I have heard many internship experiences, but this is probably the most unique I've ever heard, Shamina. So I'm keeping this one. So you were working with SEIU. You came to Texas to work with Ann Richards. During the summer between your first and second year, you get arrested protesting on social justice issues. But then you, shortly thereafter leaving the LBJ school, you went to work for the private sector. Mm-hmm. So talk to us about that turn, because I think, and one of the things I want to unpack with you is that option of the private sector, the corporate sector, for public affairs professionals. It's usually not the first thing that comes to mind in terms of, what are you going to pursue post-graduation? So if you can talk about your personal experience about that and where you see the linkages of our education and public affairs and corporate work.
I think it's a really important question, and I'll say that look, there's a lot of things I can say in retrospect, and so hopefully that'll be useful. But at the time, it all was a bit. I mean, everything sort of felt just like the next thing. So keep in mind that when I was at the LBJ school, and then I was working for SEIU, I did campaign work. So every 2 years, I had a different job. And so, and even with SEIU and sort of like the organizing campaigns, everything was always very, very compressed, very campaign-like. And so after I came, actually the other part of this is that I actually never finished my classwork at the LBJ school. So halfway during my second year, SEIU asked me to come to Washington, D.C. To work on their healthcare campaign. And so because of the research that we were developing out of Texas was really important work, and it was sort of providing a way to do this type of thing. They asked me to come to Washington, D.C. to see if I could join their campaign there. So the SEIU had been very flexible and sort of allowing me to work part-time and go to the LBJ school. And then the LBJ school was very flexible in allowing me to complete my coursework and turn in my my thesis to Ray. I wanted to say Ray Brown, but I don't know if that's right. But my thesis advisor was a former labor secretary who was teaching at the LBJ school at the time. And so I actually didn't, so I came back for graduation, but actually did my second semester in Washington, D.C. But it's important to say that because right after that, I went to work in the President Clinton's administration. And so I went to work at the Labor Department and did work on congressional healthcare there. And then went to work at the White House for President Clinton running their Asian American initiative, which we'll talk about. And then came back to Texas and did more campaign work, worked for Nancy Pelosi. So all that to say that I did a lot of work in the public sector. I sort of covered a lot of ground in my 20s and 30s. And so that by the time, I guess, President Bush was elected a second time, I sort of said, you know what, I got to figure out what I want to do here, because either I can stay in the public sector, which is totally fine, and do something there, or I can decide if I sort of felt like I needed to learn something new. Like I was like, I don't know that I know enough to do the best job that I can for public service. And so I went to Governor Richards, who was lucky for me, so fortunate that she was my mentor for the rest of her life. And I just said, what do you think I should do? And she said, you need to learn how money moves. And she said, if you don't know how money works, and if you don't know how the private sector does its work, you will never be able to make the best public policy you can. And she said that was one of the things that she learned as governor and as treasurer and things like that. She said that the financing and the investor relation, all the things that are happening in publicly traded companies, she said those are things that you have to know if indeed you actually want to serve everybody. And so that took me to Citibank, where I started doing community relations, but I literally went to work for a bank so I could learn how money works and how money moves. And that was the transition from public sector to private sector, and then onwards onto MasterCard and things like that. But the basic premise was to understand a whole new skill set, a whole new world, so that I could bridge between the social sector, government sector, and private sector, and continue service for the public good. And I'll say one more thing, which is something I learned at the LBJ school, is that they teach us how to be skilled generalists, which I thought was kind of funny at the time. I was like, what on earth is a skilled generalist? But in retrospect, what a great way to learn, because it was not necessarily the thing you needed to go deep on data analytics or things like that, but it gave you enough of a sense of what you needed to know, the types of information that you needed to have in order to construct the argument, construct a frame, construct the right questions. And that skill set is applicable across any industry. So I hope that gives a little bit of insight, but I think that probably more than anything has led to this, to something that I really do believe, which is, as people talk about innovation and disruption and all of these things, I actually think that the disruptors going forward are going to be people who know how to translate between the various sectors, because ultimately those intersections are the places that actually make the difference in the long run.
We just finished our recruitment of the next class, Shamina, and so you get to talk to a lot of the prospective students. And one thing I always say to prospective students about the LBJ school is that you will leave here an analytical Green Beret, right? We are known for being a school that is very strong as a generalist, and that you have the skill set. And I love how you highlight the fact that this isn't just about business school. It's not just McCombs over there and you get to learn how to interact with the private sector, but it's something that we should have in our skill set. And I think I mentioned to you earlier that the LBJ school was one of the foundational members in launching a new pipeline program for our students to intern, mentor, and consider that path in terms of thinking how the private sector is an option in addition to the other options we traditionally think of: social sector, philanthropy, government work. And thinking in this holistic way, Shamina, I wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk about this big picture umbrella of Trisector leadership, and kind of how our students can think about this model instead of the narrower ones that we traditionally look at.
No, I think it's really important. No matter because the other thing is, no matter what sector you end up working in, having a skill set to understand the various points of view is the thing that you're trying to do, to do your best work. I mean, that's the way that I looked at it. But for me, at least, I didn't really understand. I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I was, doing the work for government. I was doing the work for, in my case, a labor union. But I didn't know that I didn't know all this stuff about, analytics in the private sector, or sort of how, the thinking happens there. And so it was more about, I had to experience it. And the truth is that I don't know that, I don't know if this is the right advice or not during these times, but it's sort of like, I was never in it for the 40-year job in one place. So I was sort of in it to sort of say, you get this time on earth to do something. And so change has been the thing that I've really been focused on. And so so my risk appetite is very high, I guess. Maybe the older I get, the lower it gets, but the appetite to learn new things, do new things, and keep moving, keep momentum, I think are the other pieces of the puzzle. And again, I just have to say that, Stacey Abrams was in my class at the LBJ school. And you talked about the Barbara Jordan Forum. That was started by another classmate of mine. So that was the year that they started the Barbara Jordan Forum was then. So, props to my class, but I'm just saying for the newer entrants into the LBJ school, remember your legacy and compete always with the people who came before you. And the last thing I'll say is that I don't know if did the LBJers still do t-shirts like with themes, and like, do they still do the?
No, what is this, Shamina? We need to bring it back.
Okay, so our t-shirts that every year, like every class did a t-shirt, right? It was the LBJ school t-shirt. And our year it said, if you want to, I can't remember the exact thing, but something like, if you want to get a name brand, or if you want to, I think something like screw around or whatever, if you want to, kind of do it, it was not being serious, go to the Kennedy School. If you actually want to do something real and hire somebody great, hire an LBJ grad. And so there was like this, because the Kennedy School was also, I think, just starting around the time where it had just started. And we were very serious about our work. And so, but anyways, that was sort of the logo on our t-shirt at the time.
All right, I think I'm going to put the hard press on the students to bring back the t-shirt tradition.
You got to bring back the t-shirt.
I like this. So, Shamina, I want to pivot, but we were just talking about that legacy of Barbara Jordan that your class instituted, and in looking toward the challenges and the opportunities of our communities of color face in this country, I wanted to talk to you in the context of this moment of reflection on AAPI Heritage Month. Also, recent violence that we've seen and continual violence and continual lack of inclusivity for our AAPI community. So I wanted to get your assessment, your informed assessment of where we are and where we need to go.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a good question, but it's a hard question. And unfortunately, I think we've made a ton of progress, but these problems these are historic endemic problems that have plagued us throughout history. And unfortunately, I think that we will continue to have to address these going forward. I mentioned Stacey Abrams, who's in my class. We actually invited her to come to as a guest of the Center for Inclusive Growth just earlier this year to talk to us about what she had seen and what she was seeing in Georgia as part of Fair Fight, and sort of and she sort of said change is she said, as long as there's something happening that's moving us forward, she's cool with that. She said, and she was like, some things are going to happen really fast and some things are going to take a longer time. And she said, the point is you have to keep moving. And I think that's the piece of the puzzle, right? It's like the AAPI hate, because of the pandemic and the increased violence against Asian Americans, it's sickening. But it's not new, unfortunately. And so I think what we are seeing, because technology allows us to see things in real time and social media and things like that, for our Black brothers and sisters, I think, again, you ask them and the stuff that they've been seeing for years, it's not new. It's just that we can all see it now. And I think that that's part of the Asian American experience as well, is that, I grew up in a small Southern town, and, I have to say that it was, there was a lot of great things about it, but there was also a lot of hard things about it. And so, our family wasn't allowed to join the swimming pool in our town. And so, but at the same time, we had, really incredible experiences and really generous experiences with our neighbors as well. So I think that this sounds, it's not black and white. It is not one or the other. It's the complexity of human existence that you have to be able to see the shades of gray when you are trying. Of course, there are things that are absolutely wrong. Some things are absolutely right. But as people who are in the space of policymaking and critical thinking and bridge building and trying to solve these things, we have to be able to say, let's look at the analytics. Let's also look at the reality and the lived experience, but it's that process of analyzing and the process of problem solving that I think distinguishes students like LBJ students from other folks who frankly have the luxury of living in the extremes. We don't have the luxury because we're actually in it. We're actually studying how to fix the problem. And when you're trying to figure out how to fix the problem, you don't have the luxury of being on either end of the spectrum. You have to figure out how to bridge these two things. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's sort of the approach that that I've been taking at the Center for Inclusive Growth, while recognizing that these issues are certainly, they almost sometimes feel intractable.
And I think it's important that we remember that many of these issues are not new. Perhaps the scale of them, the technology that amplifies them are new, but these issues are not new. And then you compound that with the fact that the Asian American and Pacific Islander population is the fastest growing nationwide. We see it here in Texas. So it's how do we navigate this and providing this inclusive space for a group that is continually growing. And I think it is so prescient that you highlight that it's not just about wringing our hands and saying, oh, well, we've got these challenges, but about doing. And, when President Johnson was at the groundbreaking of the school. He said, this school is about thinkers and doers, right? We're not just sitting around thinking, but we're doing it as, future elected officials, policymakers, folks like yourself, Shamina. And I think here's where I want to pivot to your work on the Asian American Foundation Board, because I know that there is some very serious investment here by the part of this foundation, and what you see in terms of that investment, of that return on investment for the AAPI community.
I think it's a really important moment in time. So the Asian American Foundation is the first time where you're seeing Asian Americans investing in Asian Americans, for Asian Americans, by Asian Americans, if that makes sense. So they're on a path to raise $1 billion for the foundation. The members of the board and others have personally raised right now, I think 125 million. But the point of it is, and this is where this gets to this thing about combining forces and joining forces. So I ran President Clinton's first office on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And keep in mind that when President Clinton signed an executive order creating this White House initiative and this Presidential Advisory Commission on Asian Americans, that was the first executive order since Japanese internment / imprisonment, whatever you want to call it. But that was the first executive order signed by a president since World War II, and Asian Americans were put into camps. And so that was a moment where we concentrated on the government, right? And we sort of said, what are the assets of the government that we need to turn to make sure that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders feel part and parcel of the American experience? That was one section. Now, fast forward 100 years later, I'm now at MasterCard doing this work. And it links back to what I said about the private sector. The Asian American Foundation now is forming because they're aggregating private sector assets in service of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. So for many years, we've relied, and we still rely on public sector assets. It's done, does incredible work, needs to do a lot more. That has to continue. And by the way, that White House Office on Asian Americans has continued since President Clinton. So every president subsequently has signed the executive order. And so I think what this foundation will do is start to aggregate corporate philanthropy, foundations, academics, private sector leaders in a way that I think we haven't been organized before, again, in service to raise the visibility and the issues facing Asian Americans, but also to help make sure that this fastest growing demographic in the United States not only contributes to the American fabric, but benefits from everything that this country has to offer. So again, I think it's a really important moment in our history as a community, but also the history of this country.
Now, we have about 10, 15 minutes left in our conversation, and I wanted to open it up to the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, we're not doing the webinar so that you can ask and engage directly with Shamina. But what I wanted to ask while folks get their thoughts together is, Shamina, I see that we have Amy Kroll, who is our inaugural executive director of the LBJ Women's Campaign School. So I wanted to talk to you about the role of women of color, especially women at the intersection of identities, queer women, women of color, in running for office, and what you have seen in the AAPI community in terms of running for office and that community supporting each other to get that seat at the table.
That's great. Well, hey, Amy, nice to see you. And thanks for joining. I think that that is why I moved to Texas, right? Was because at the time, Ann Richards she was like not only one of the only games in town, she was like the game in town. And so her success was everybody's success. And I think and now we're at a place where, you have the first female vice president, and you've got, the Speaker of the House, and you've got, but it can't stop there. More than anything else, representation matters. And I think that's one thing that I continue to learn over and over and over again. It's not enough to be represented. It's not enough to sort of, be part of the system. It's actually sitting at the table that actually, that makes the difference. And, I'll just share one story, and because it's a very personal one. And that is, so one, just on the campaign work. Yes, women have to run. Cecile Richards started an organization called Supermajority, which organized women to participate in the election last cycle. And so that is just it's an incredibly important part of our ability, frankly, to become more economically empowered. And so it's hugely important. But I'll give an example of just, a very specific moment where, Governor Richards, again, we talk about this. I didn't know what I didn't know. So I was like a kid from Southern Virginia and moved to Texas and, whatever. And so, but she said, there's this thing called the Aspen Institute, and they have a fellowship program for smart people and who want to make a difference in the world. And I think you should apply for this program. And Governor Richards was a trustee of the Aspen Institute at the time. And I was busy doing my own thing. Like I was working on campaigns. I was doing all this. I was like, yep, Governor, I will, definitely get to it. But she called me again and said, I told you need to apply for this program. I am going to write you a letter of recommendation. So she said, so you need to apply for it and you need to write my letter of recommendation for you. So I was like, okay, I did that. But I was accepted into this fellowship program called the Henry Crown program at the Aspen Institute. I was in the 4th class. And that was in, I think 2003 or something, 2003, 2004. But that group of people has sustained me throughout my entire career. And so the power of network and the power of the people that you meet in your lifetime will sustain you and will be the places where you can have the biggest difference, because that's where you get exponential support and exponential amplification and exponential everything is through your network. And so I say that only because it took her quite literally making me join this program. That program and the people in it since then have changed my life. But it started, the first time I experienced the power of network, though, was at the LBJ school, because I went to my undergrad to get my studies done. But the LBJ school, graduate school, became the place where I met the people that I was going to know forever. And so that power of the network, the people that you're with now, I can't, again, overestimate how important that network will be. So to this day, my friends are Ellen Richards and Kristen Vassallo and Bergen, Casey, but was Norris. Like, I'm still friends with all of my friends from the LBJ school, and they're all doing incredible things, but we always help each other on the journey. And so just look around and make sure you don't lose touch with the people that you're with right now.
And I think it's that networking component, Shamina, and also the mentorship piece, right? And seeking out those mentors along the way. And sometimes it's asking. There are programs. We just launched a new mentorship program at the LBJ school, but not being shy to ask. And with a mentor like Ann Richards, you can't say no to her. I mean, anything she asks, there was just no way to say no. I see a question here in the chat. It's a longish one. Let me read a little bit of it, and then we'll get the conversation going. But this might seem small, but there are small steps companies can take to foster inclusiveness, like making Lunar New Year a holiday just like Christmas and New Year's. AAPI colleagues often have to work during important cultural celebrations. Probably same experiences for Jewish cultures, Black cultures, Juneteenth, etc. What are your thoughts on that, Shamina? Where do you see the corporate world moving on that?
I think they're moving. Look, I think that, I just by what I've seen here in my experience with MasterCard, that what they've started doing more of is just giving you time and you decide how you want to use it. So look, the federal government designates holidays, right? And so they sort of decide on some of those things. I think that more and more workplaces are saying, okay, we have to acknowledge the federal holidays because whatever, they're the federal holidays, but we're going to just give you time and you decide what days you want to take, how you want to take them, and up above and beyond sort of your vacation time. So, because I know in the Indian community, Diwali is a big celebration, like Lunar New Year and things like that. And so there's always this movement to say, hey, let's all take off for Diwali, or let's, do something appropriate around that. And so I do see more and more of companies acknowledging that, and especially global companies. If you're a multinational corporation, you have to think globally about what's happening. And so it's, I know that if I'm going to get my colleagues in India, I better get them the day before Diwali. If I'm going to, because they're gone once Diwali happens. And that's the work ethic of them. And same with Ramadan, same with, other holidays. So it's just, I think it's going to be something that's it's table stakes, I think now.
Awesome. Jonathan, I'd like to invite you to ask Shamina a question.
Hi, Ms. Singh. Thank you so much for being here and talking with us today. This is such a treat. Thank you so much for your insight. So for those of us that are going into the corporate world, and we kind of landed in roles that don't necessarily focus on inclusivity or diversity, what would your recommendation be? Or do you have any advice on how we can continue to champion those things in our roles and in our organizations and groups, even though we might not be solely focusing on this sort of
yeah, thank God you're not solely focusing on these things. Like, you shouldn't be. Like, part of the reason, and you don't have to tell me where you're going, but you do your job. Like, do your job really, really well. But as part of that, you probably will have access to employee affinity groups, maybe depending on the size of your company. And so for us, there are different, like, LGBT groups, there are Asian American groups, there are African American groups, things like that. So there are groups of employees who continue to do stuff together, and they're often the ones who are called on to advise on business decisions, but they're also, you should be able to see yourself throughout the company and make networks, make friends with people who are in the same space, because more often than not, hopefully if it's a purpose-driven company, you'll be spending a lot of time talking about these issues, even if it isn't part of your day job. But certainly the people in your social impact space or your philanthropic space would be your first port of call too.
I want to thank you, Jonathan, for asking that question. And also just a big shout out to you for your work and your voice at the LBJ School and the AAPI community and building out that inclusive space. All right, we've got 2 minutes left. So I promise this is a short last question, Shamina, but what is your advice to the LBJ students, the LBJ community here, and as they go forward?
I think my advice would be to just say yes. Like, start with yes, and then figure out how to get there. I think too often than not, we negotiate against ourselves, and we talk ourselves out of opportunities more than we talk ourselves into opportunities. And I remember those moments when, somebody was saying, oh, I got the job at, this particular consulting firm, or I got a job, or I didn't get the job, or I did, the thing is, I'll just say yes. Like, there are no, like, as long as you have forward momentum, there are no wrong decisions, and you will be able to switch from job to job and go from thing to thing. And so I think that's my biggest piece of advice is don't operate from a place of fear. You are going to achieve amazing things. You're going to live the life you want, keep forward momentum, and just say yes.
All right, so I think that this is probably a great candidate for restarting the t-shirt tradition, is to just say yes.
There you go. Yeah, there you go.
My vote goes for that. Shamina, thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to have you physically here in Austin, engaging with our community, with the students. But in the meantime, thank you for your time, for your energy, and for your voice in policy, but also for our community and growing those inclusive spaces. So adios, hasta luego, bye-bye from Austin, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.